The neon sign outside Murphy's Roadside bar flickered intermittently, casting red and blue shadows across the gravel parking lot. It was the kind of place where questions weren't asked and strangers were measured by the weight of their silence. On this particular Thursday evening in late September, the air hung thick with the smell of diesel fuel and impending rain. Inside, the jukebox played an old Willie Nelson tune, competing with the crack of pool balls and the low rumble of conversation. Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of ginger ale. She was a woman who didn't immediately command attention, average height, slender build, with light brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore faded jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and weathered boots that had seen better days. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like a tired traveler passing through, perhaps a waitress on her day off or a librarian taking a detour home. Her hands wrapped around the glass with a gentleness that suggested someone accustomed to handling fragile things. She had stopped at Murphy's out of necessity rather than choice. Her 12-year-old Honda had started making an ominous grinding noise about 5 miles back, and this was the first sign of civilization she'd encountered in the last hour. The mechanic at the gas station next door had promised to take a look, but he'd need at least 45 minutes. So Sarah had wandered into the bar, ordered something non-alcoholic, and settled in to wait, her phone plugged into the wall outlet behind her as it slowly charged. The door swung open with enough force to rattle the frame, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. 5 figures filled the entrance, their silhouettes backlit by the fading daylight. They moved with the swagger of men who were used to owning every room they entered. The leader was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4" and north of 250 pounds, with a gray-streaked beard that reached his chest. His leather vest displayed patches that told stories of roads traveled and allegiances earned. Behind him, 4 others fanned out, each carrying the same air of casual menace. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The bartender, a weathered man named Jack who'd been pouring drinks for 30 years, straightened up slightly. He knew these men. The Iron Serpents. They rolled through every few months, and while they usually kept their trouble to a minimum, there was always an edge to their visits. The leader, who went by the name Crusher, scanned the room with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. The 5 bikers claimed the center of the bar like they were planting a flag. Crusher's voice boomed across the space as he ordered a round of whiskey, his laugh too loud, too aggressive. His companions joined in, their voices creating a wall of sound that pushed against the other patrons. One by one, the locals began to finish their drinks a little faster, finding reasons to head for the door. Within 10 minutes, the bar had cleared out considerably, leaving only a handful of regulars too stubborn or too drunk to care, and Sarah, who remained focused on her phone, apparently oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Crusher noticed her after his second whiskey. His gaze lingered, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet bar. "Looks like we got ourselves some fresh company, boys." Sarah didn't look up. She continued scrolling through her phone, her posture relaxed, almost bored. This seemed to irritate Crusher more than if she'd shown fear. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone who looked as unassuming as the woman at the end of the bar. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his tone dripping with false friendliness. "Ain't polite to ignore folks when they're talking to you." Still, Sarah didn't respond. She took a slow sip of her ginger ale, her eyes never leaving her phone screen. Jack, the bartender, caught her eye and gave a subtle shake of his head, a warning. But if Sarah saw it, she gave no indication. Crusher pushed back from the bar, his stool scraping loudly against the wooden floor. His companions watched with the anticipation of men who knew what was coming and were eager for the entertainment. He approached Sarah with heavy footsteps, each one deliberate, designed to intimidate. When he reached her side, he leaned against the bar, invading her space with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. "You deaf or just rude?" he asked, his breath heavy with whiskey fumes. Sarah finally looked up. Her eyes were a pale blue, calm as a winter lake. She met Crusher's gaze without flinching, without the fear he was accustomed to inspiring. "Neither," she said quietly. "Just not interested in conversation." The temperature in the room dropped another few degrees. Crusher's jaw tightened. Behind him, one of his companions, a wiry man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, let out a low whistle. "She's got some mouth on her, Crush." Crusher's hand came down on the bar next to Sarah's phone with enough force to make her glass jump. The sound echoed through the near-empty room like a gunshot. "Listen here, little girl," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "When someone shows you respect by trying to talk to you, you show respect back. That's how things work in the real world." Sarah slowly set her phone down on the bar, face down. She turned on her stool to face Crusher fully, her movements unhurried and deliberate. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with fine lines around her eyes that suggested someone who smiled often, though she wasn't smiling now. Her expression was neutral, almost clinical, as if she were examining an interesting specimen under glass. "The real world," she repeated, her voice steady. "Is that what you call this? 5 grown men trying to intimidate one woman in a bar?" She glanced past Crusher to his companions, who had started to move closer, forming a loose semicircle. "Must make you feel very powerful." The wiry man with the snake tattoo laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Oh, she's definitely got a mouth on her. Crush, you gonna let her talk to you like that?" Crusher's face had turned an unhealthy shade of red. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from someone who looked like they'd blow away in a strong wind. His pride was at stake now, not just in front of his crew but in front of Jack and the few remaining patrons who were watching with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. "Last chance," Crusher said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than his earlier shouting. "Apologize for your disrespect, buy us a round of drinks, and maybe we forget this happened." Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering. "Or what?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Crusher's hand shot out, reaching for Sarah's arm. Whether to grab her, shake her, or pull her off the stool was unclear. What happened next would be debated by the witnesses for years to come, with each retelling adding its own embellishments and details. Sarah's hand moved so fast it seemed to blur. One moment Crusher's hand was reaching for her, the next it was caught in her grip, twisted at an angle that made him gasp in pain. She had moved off her stool and somehow positioned herself so that Crusher's considerable bulk was working against him, his own momentum and weight making it impossible for him to pull free without dislocating his wrist. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice still calm, still quiet, "I'm going to give you the same last chance you gave me. Walk away. Right now. While you still can." For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the wiry man with the snake tattoo moved, reaching for something in his vest. He didn't make it 2 steps before Sarah had released Crusher's wrist and pivoted. Her elbow caught snake tattoo in the solar plexus with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp. As he doubled over, her knee came up to meet his face, not with the wild haymaker of a bar brawler, but with the calculated efficiency of someone who had done this before, many times before. Snake tattoo hit the ground like a sack of concrete, blood streaming from his nose. The other 3 bikers rushed forward in a coordinated attack that spoke to experience. These weren't amateurs who'd watched too many action movies, they knew how to fight, how to use their size and strength to overwhelm an opponent. But Sarah moved through them like water flowing around stones, never where they expected her to be, always a step ahead. The first man, a barrel-chested giant with arms like tree trunks, threw a punch that would have taken Sarah's head off if it had connected. Instead, Sarah ducked under it, her hand striking out to hit a pressure point on his inner thigh. The giant's leg buckled, and as he stumbled, Sarah's palm drove into his chin, snapping his head back. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the edge of a table before he sprawled across the floor. The fourth man, slightly more cautious than his companions, tried to grab Sarah from behind, wrapping his arms around her in a bear hug that would have crushed a normal person. Sarah drove her heel down onto his instep with enough force that everyone in the bar heard something crack. As his grip loosened, she threw her head back, connecting with his nose. He released her with a howl of pain, stumbling backward into the jukebox, which skipped and started playing the same line of the Willie Nelson song over and over. That left Crusher and one other man, a lean, dangerous-looking individual with cold eyes and scars that suggested he was the real threat in the group. He and Crusher exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then they moved together, trying to flank Sarah from both sides. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah's breathing hadn't changed. She wasn't gasping or panting like someone in the middle of a fight, she was as calm as if she were taking a morning walk. She watched both men with that same clinical detachment, calculating angles and distances with a precision that suggested extensive training. Crusher feinted left, and the scarred man moved right, both closing in with the synchronized efficiency of predators who had hunted together before. But Sarah had already anticipated the move. She grabbed a bar stool with one hand, swinging it in a controlled arc that caught Crusher in the ribs. The impact wasn't wild or desperate, it was measured, designed to create space and disruption rather than serious injury. As Crusher stumbled back, gasping, the scarred man lunged. His hands were up in a guard position, his footwork solid. This was someone who had trained, who knew what he was doing. Sarah recognized it immediately and adjusted her strategy accordingly. When he threw a combination, jab, cross, hook, she parried the first two and slipped under the third, her counterstrike hitting him in the floating ribs with enough force to crack at least one of them. But the scarred man was tough. He absorbed the hit with a grunt and kept coming, grabbing for Sarah's hoodie. He managed to get a handful of fabric and yanked her toward him, his other hand drawing back for a devastating blow. Sarah let herself be pulled in, closer than he expected, inside his guard. Her forehead connected with his nose, another headbutt, delivered with the kind of precision that spoke to countless hours of training. The scarred man's grip loosened, and Sarah twisted free, her elbow coming around to catch him in the temple. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, out cold before he hit the ground. Crusher had recovered from the stool strike and was charging forward, roaring his rage. He was done with technique, done with strategy. He wanted to hurt this woman who had humiliated him and his crew. His size and weight were his weapons now, and he launched himself at Sarah like a linebacker going for a tackle. Sarah didn't try to move out of the way. Instead, she stepped forward to meet him, using his momentum against him. Her hands found pressure points on his neck, the vagus nerve on one side, the carotid artery on the other. She squeezed, precisely and efficiently, while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him. Crusher's vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges, and suddenly he was on his back on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, his body refusing to obey his commands. Sarah stood over him, not even breathing hard. She looked down at the 5 men sprawled across the floor of Murphy's roadside bar, 1 unconscious, 3 groaning in pain, and Crusher slowly regaining his senses but unable to move. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 90 seconds. Jack, the bartender, stood frozen behind the bar, his mouth hanging open. In 30 years of serving drinks, he'd seen plenty of bar fights. He'd seen drunks throw wild punches, bikers break bottles over each other's heads, and angry cowboys settle disputes with broken pool cues. But he'd never seen anything like what he'd just witnessed. This woman had moved through 5 dangerous men like they were children, dismantling them with an efficiency that was almost beautiful in its precision. Sarah walked back to her stool, picked up her phone, and checked the screen. Then she looked at Jack. "Could I get another ginger ale, please? And maybe some ice in a bag for these gentlemen when they're ready for it." Her voice was steady, conversational, as if she'd just returned from using the restroom rather than taking down 5 bikers. Jack nodded numbly and reached for a glass with shaking hands. The door to the bar opened, and a state trooper walked in, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon when he saw the carnage. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded, his eyes taking in the scene, 5 large men on the ground, 1 small woman sitting calmly at the bar. Jack found his voice. "These boys started some trouble with the lady. She finished it. The trooper's gaze shifted to Sarah, his expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are while I sort this out." Sarah nodded calmly. "Of course, officer. I'm not going anywhere. My car's still in the shop next door anyway." As the trooper began checking on the groaning bikers, pulling out his radio to call for backup in an ambulance, Crusher managed to push himself into a sitting position. His pride was shattered, his ribs ached, and his wrist throbbed where Sarah had twisted it. He looked at her with a mixture of pain, confusion, and dawning respect. "Who the hell are you?" he croaked. Sarah took a sip of her fresh ginger ale, considering the question. The last rays of sunlight streaming through the window caught her face, and for just a moment, Jack could see something in her eyes, something hard and distant, a depth of experience that didn't match her unremarkable appearance. "Just a simple woman having a drink," she said finally. "You should have left it at that." The trooper finished his radio call and turned back to the group. "Ambulance is on the way. Now, somebody want to tell me exactly what happened here?" He looked at Crusher. "You and your boys start trouble with this woman?" Crusher exchanged glances with his conscious companions. His pride screamed at him to lie, to make up some story that didn't make them look like complete fools. But something in Sarah's eyes stopped him. There was a warning there, subtle but unmistakable. If he lied, if he tried to turn this around on her, she would make things worse for him somehow. He was sure of it. "We started it," Crusher admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We came at her. She defended herself." The trooper's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. He looked from the massive biker to the unassuming woman at the bar, then back again. "You're telling me that you five tried to start something with her, and she put all of you down?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Crusher said, wincing as he tried to shift his weight. "We got what we deserved." The other conscious bikers nodded in reluctant agreement. The wiry man with the snake tattoo was sitting up now, blood still trickling from his broken nose, his eyes watering from the pain. The barrel-chested giant was conscious but dazed, touching the growing lump on the back of his head with tentative fingers. The man who'd tried the bear hug was cradling his broken foot, his face pale with pain. The trooper pulled out a notepad, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and get your statement." Sarah reached into her hoodie pocket and produced a wallet, extracting her driver's license. The trooper examined it, his expression shifting as he read the information. "Sarah Mitchell. Address in Arlington, Virginia." He looked up at her sharply. "What brings you to our neck of the woods, Ms. Mitchell?" "Just passing through, officer. Car trouble brought me here. I was waiting for the mechanic when these gentlemen decided to make things complicated." The trooper studied her for a long moment, and Sarah had the distinct impression he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. He was older, probably in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been doing this job for decades. He'd seen enough to recognize when something didn't quite add up. "You have some kind of training, Ms. Mitchell? Self-defense classes, maybe martial arts?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "I've taken some self-defense courses over the years. A woman traveling alone needs to know how to protect herself." It was technically true, though it was also the kind of non-answer that left out more than it revealed. The trooper clearly knew it, but before he could press further, the ambulance arrived, its lights painting the interior of the bar in rotating red and white. 2 paramedics entered, their expressions going from professional concern to shock as they took in the scene. They'd expected maybe 1 or 2 injured people from a bar fight, not 5 grown men in various states of distress. They immediately went to work, checking vitals and assessing injuries. "This one's got a possible concussion," one paramedic called out, examining the scarred man who was still unconscious on the floor. "We need to transport him first." "Broken nose here, possibly a fractured cheekbone," the other said, crouching next to Snake Tattoo. "And this one's definitely got broken ribs," he added, moving to the scarred man who Sarah had hit in the floating ribs before knocking him out. The barrel-chested giant waved off the paramedic trying to examine him. "I'm fine. Just got my bell rung." I've had worse. Sir, you need to let me check you for a concussion. I said I'm fine. The giant's voice was firm, but he was still touching the lump on his head, his eyes not quite focusing properly. The trooper made notes, occasionally glancing at Sarah with an expression that mixed professional suspicion with genuine curiosity. When he'd finished with the initial assessment, he gestured for Sarah to follow him to a corner of the bar, away from the chaos of the paramedics treating the injured bikers. Ms. Mitchell, I've been a state trooper for 23 years, he said quietly. I've seen a lot of things. But I've never seen anyone, man or woman, take down 5 experienced fighters that quickly or that efficiently. Those aren't the results of some self-defense courses. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Are you accusing me of something, officer? Because from where I'm sitting, I was minding my own business when I was threatened by 5 men who outweighed me by a combined 1,000 pounds. I defended myself. They've admitted that's what happened. Unless Virginia has some law against defending yourself too effectively, I don't see what the problem is. The trooper studied her for another long moment, then sighed. No, ma'am, you're right. You were defending yourself, and given the disparity in size and numbers, your response was arguably justified. But... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm going to level with you. Those boys are iron serpents. They're not choir boys, but they're not the worst we've got around here either. They keep their noses mostly clean, pay their tabs, don't cause too much trouble. And you just humiliated them in front of witnesses. What's your point, officer? My point is that pride can be a dangerous thing. Crusher over there is going to have to live this down with his club. Some men might let it go, might accept they picked the wrong fight. But some men can't let that kind of humiliation stand. He lowered his voice further. I'm not saying he'll come after you, but I am saying you might want to finish your business here and move on quickly once your car is ready. Sarah's expression softened slightly, just for a moment. I appreciate the warning, officer. Truly. But I've dealt with wounded pride before. I'll be fine. I'm sure you will, the trooper said dryly. That's what worries me. Look, I don't know what your story is, and frankly, I'm not sure I want to. But we're a small community here. We don't need any more trouble than we've already got. Before Sarah could respond, the door to the bar opened again, and a tall woman in her late 50s entered, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a denim jacket over a floral dress, and her sharp eyes immediately assessed the situation with the kind of calm authority that suggested someone used to handling chaos. Jack, the bartender, visibly relaxed when he saw her. Sheriff Martinez, the trooper said, straightening up. Didn't expect to see you tonight. Got the call on the radio, Thompson. Figured I'd better come see for myself. Sheriff Elena Martinez's gaze swept across the injured bikers, then landed on Sarah. You must be Ms. Mitchell. I am. I hear you had quite the evening. The sheriff's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. She moved closer, her boots clicking on the wooden floor. 5 against 1. That's usually not a fair fight. It wasn't, Sarah agreed. But not for the reasons they thought. A slight smile tugged at the corner of Sheriff Martinez's mouth. No, I don't imagine it was. She turned to the trooper. Thompson, why don't you go help the paramedics get these boys sorted out? I'd like to have a word with Ms. Mitchell alone. Thompson hesitated, clearly curious about what the sheriff wanted to discuss privately, but he nodded and moved away. Sheriff Martinez gestured to a table in the far corner, away from the organized chaos of the medical treatment. Sarah picked up her ginger ale and followed. They sat across from each other, and the sheriff folded her hands on the table, her expression thoughtful. I've been sheriff of this county for 12 years, Ms. Mitchell. Before that, I spent 15 years with the DA. I've seen a lot of things, met a lot of people. And I've developed a pretty good sense for when someone isn't quite what they appear to be. Sarah said nothing, simply waiting. You move like someone with extensive training. Military, maybe. Or federal law enforcement. The way you neutralized those men, That wasn't amateur hour. That was professional-grade combat training. The sheriff paused. So the question becomes, what's someone with your skill set doing passing through our little corner of nowhere? Car trouble, Sarah said. Sometimes the explanation really is that simple. Sometimes, the sheriff agreed. But not always. Your license says Arlington, Virginia. That's interesting geography for someone who claims to be just passing through rural Tennessee. Sarah took a sip of her ginger ale, her expression remaining neutral. I'm on my way to visit family in Texas. I took the scenic route. The sheriff leaned back in her chair. Here's the thing, Ms. Mitchell. I don't particularly care who you are or what you used to do, as long as you're not bringing trouble to my county. Those boys over there started something, and you finished it. In my book, that's self-defense, plain and simple. But I need to know if there's anything else I should be aware of. Are you running from something? Running to something? Is there anyone else who might come looking for you and cause problems in my town? The directness of the question caught Sarah slightly off guard. Most law enforcement officials danced around these kinds of inquiries, afraid of overstepping or saying something that might complicate future prosecution. Sheriff Martinez clearly had no such concerns. No, Sarah said finally. I'm not running from anything, and no one is looking for me. I really am just passing through. What happened here tonight was an unfortunate accident, wrong place, wrong time. I'll be out of your hair as soon as my car is fixed. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, her experienced eyes searching for any hint of deception. Whatever she saw, or didn't see, seemed to satisfy her. All right. I'm going to take you at your word. But I'm also going to give you the same advice Thompson probably already did, get your car fixed and move on. The Iron Serpents aren't a major criminal enterprise, but they've got pride and connections. What happened tonight, word's going to spread. Some people are going to be curious about you. Others might want to test themselves against the woman who took down Crusher and his crew. I understand. Do you? The sheriff's voice sharpened slightly. Because I'm not just worried about you, Ms. Mitchell. I'm worried about my people. This is a good community, hard-working folks trying to make a living and raise their families. We don't need to become the backdrop for whatever comes next in your story. Sarah felt a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or regret. The sheriff was right to be concerned. Sarah had spent years trying to leave her old life behind, trying to be normal, to blend in. But moments like tonight reminded her that some things couldn't be outrun, couldn't be left behind no matter how hard you tried. You have my word, Sheriff. I have no intention of causing any more problems. Once my car is ready, I'll be gone, and you'll never hear from me again. The sheriff held her gaze for another moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll hold you to that. She stood up, preparing to return to the main area of the bar. Then she paused. Off the record? That was some impressive work tonight. Whoever trained you did a hell of a job. I'll pass along the compliment, Sarah said with a slight smile. The sheriff returned to where Thompson and the paramedics were finishing up with the bikers. The scarred man had been loaded onto a gurney and was being wheeled out to the ambulance, still unconscious. The others were being treated for their various injuries, broken bones, bruised ribs, wounded pride. Crusher had refused medical treatment beyond some ice for his wrist and ribs. He sat on a bar stool, his massive frame hunched over, looking smaller than he had when he'd first walked through the door. His eyes kept drifting to Sarah, a mixture of emotions playing across his face, anger, confusion, grudging respect, and something else that might have been curiosity. As the paramedics prepared to transport Snake Tattoo and the man with the broken foot to the hospital, Crusher finally stood up and walked slowly over to where Sarah sat. The sheriff and Thompson both tensed, hands moving subtly closer to their weapons, but Crusher raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Can I talk to you for a minute? He asked, his voice rough but lacking the aggressive edge from earlier. Sarah nodded toward the empty stool beside her. Go ahead. Crusher eased himself onto the stool with a grunt of pain, cradling his ribs. Up close, Sarah could see he was older than she'd initially thought, probably pushing 50, with lines on his face that spoke of a hard life lived on the road. His hands were scarred and calloused, the knuckles permanently swollen from decades of fights. "I need to know," he said quietly, looking down at his hands rather than at her. "Are you military? Some kind of cop? Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does. Because if you're law enforcement, if you're undercover or something, then what happened tonight makes sense. But if you're not..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've been riding with the Serpents for 27 years. I've been in more fights than I can count. I've faced down cops, rival clubs, bar brawlers who thought they were tough. And I've never been taken apart like that." Sarah considered her response carefully. The truth was complicated, messy, full of classifications and clearances and information that couldn't be shared. But this man, despite his mistakes tonight, deserved something approximating honesty. "I used to work for the government," she said finally. "Not a cop, not military in the traditional sense. But yes, I had extensive training. That life is behind me now. I'm trying to build something different, something normal." Crusher nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "You were good at it." "That work?" "I was." "Why'd you leave?" It was Sarah's turn to look down at her hands, at the scars she usually kept hidden under long sleeves. "Because I was too good at it. Because I looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize the person looking back. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be just a person. Not a weapon." The honesty of her answer seemed to surprise both of them. Crusher was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I get that," he said eventually. "More than you might think. I joined the Serpents when I was 22, fresh out of the Marines. I was angry, broken, didn't know how to exist in the civilian world. The club gave me a purpose, a family. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that there's a difference between being strong and being a bully." "What happened tonight?" Sarah began. "What happened tonight was my fault," Crusher interrupted. "I saw someone alone, someone who looked vulnerable, and I wanted to feel powerful. That's on me and my boys, not you. You had every right to defend yourself." He finally met her eyes. "I'm not going to apologize for who I am or the life I've lived. But I am sorry for how we came at you tonight. That wasn't right." Sarah studied him, seeing past the intimidating exterior to the complicated man beneath. "Apology accepted. My boys and we're going to have a talk after tonight. About respect, about picking our battles, about being better than we were. No promises that we'll all turn into saints, but..." He shrugged, then winced at the pain in his ribs. "Maybe we can be less of what we were. That's all any of us can do," Sarah said. "Try to be better than we were yesterday." Crusher stood up, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive, a gesture of genuine respect rather than a test of strength. "You ever find yourself needing help around these parts, you ask for Crusher. Word will get to me. I owe you a debt." "You don't owe me anything." "Yeah, I do. You could have hurt us a lot worse than you did. I saw the restraint, even in the middle of it. You pulled your punches, not enough that we weren't feeling it, but enough that none of us are going to have permanent damage. That's a kindness, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." He was more perceptive than Sarah had given him credit for. She had indeed held back, using just enough force to neutralize the threat without causing serious, lasting harm. In her old life, that fight would have ended very differently. "Take care of yourself, Crusher. And maybe think about finding a new way to make yourself feel powerful. There are better ways than intimidating strangers in bars." He laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his ribs. "Yeah, I'm figuring that out. Safe travels, Sarah Mitchell. Something tells me the world's going to keep throwing things at you, but you'll be all right." He walked out of the bar, collecting his still mobile companions on the way. The barrel-chested giant helped the man with the injured instep limp toward the door, while Snake Tattoo, his nose packed with gauze, followed behind. As they left, Crusher paused in the doorway and gave Sarah one last nod of respect. The door swung shut behind the departing bikers, and the bar seemed to exhale collectively. The remaining patrons, 3 old-timers who had watched the entire confrontation from their corner booth, finally moved, their whispered conversation growing animated as they replayed what they'd witnessed. Jack, the bartender, poured himself a shot of whiskey with shaking hands and downed it in one gulp. Sheriff Martinez approached Sarah's position at the bar, her expression thoughtful. "That was an interesting conversation you just had with Crusher. Not many people get that kind of respect from him. He's more complicated than he lets on," Sarah observed. "Most people are." The sheriff pulled out a business card and slid it across the bar. "This has my direct number on it. Like I said, I don't think you're trouble, Ms. Mitchell, but if trouble finds you anyway, I'd appreciate a heads up before my county becomes a war zone." Sarah picked up the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into her wallet. "I appreciate that, Sheriff. But like I said, I'll be gone soon. We'll see." Sheriff Martinez turned to Thompson. "Get Ms. Mitchell's full statement, make sure everything's documented properly. I want this by the book." She glanced at Sarah one more time. "Just in case." As Thompson pulled out his notepad and began walking Sarah through the events of the evening in official detail, the mechanic from next door appeared in the doorway. He was a thin man in his 60s, wearing oil-stained coveralls and wiping his hands on an even dirtier rag. "Ms. Mitchell? Your Honda's ready. Wasn't as bad as I thought, just a worn serpentine belt. Replaced it and checked the rest of your systems. You should be good to go." Sarah felt a wave of relief. The evening had gone on far longer than she'd anticipated, and every minute she stayed increased the chances of further complications. She finished giving her statement to Thompson, signed the necessary paperwork, and settled her bar tab with Jack, leaving a generous tip that made his eyebrows rise. "You take care of yourself, ma'am," Jack said, his voice still slightly shaky. That was something else tonight." "Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand," Sarah said, trying to downplay the situation. "Happens more often than you'd think." Jack laughed, a genuine sound. "Ma'am, I've been pouring drinks in this bar for 30 years, and I can honestly say nothing like that has ever happened before. You're one of a kind." Sarah paid the mechanic for the repair work, collected her keys, and walked out into the parking lot. The sun had fully set now, and the sky was a deep purple-black, studded with stars that were rarely visible in the cities where she usually found herself. The air had cooled considerably, carrying the smell of impending rain and oil from the gas station. Her Honda sat in the parking lot, looking humble and unassuming, much like Sarah herself. She climbed in, started the engine, and was pleased to hear it running smoothly, without the grinding noise that had brought her to this place. As she prepared to pull out of the parking lot and leave this strange evening behind, she noticed a figure leaning against a motorcycle near the edge of the lot. It was Crusher. Alone. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the center console where she kept her weapon, but she forced herself to relax. If he'd wanted to ambush her, he wouldn't be standing in plain sight under a streetlight. She put the car in park and rolled down her window. Crusher pushed off from his motorcycle and approached slowly, his movements stiff from his injuries. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted to make sure you got out of here okay. Concerned about me, or making sure I actually leave? Both, if I'm being honest." He stopped a respectful distance from her car. "Look, I meant what I said inside. What happened tonight, that's on us. But I also know how things work. Word's already spreading. By tomorrow morning, every club within 200 miles is going to know about the woman who took down 5 iron serpents. Some people are going to think it's funny. Others are going to see it as a challenge. And you're warning me about this because whether you believe it or not, I'm trying to be better than I was a few hours ago. And because..." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I've got a daughter." She's 23, smart as hell, living in Nashville, working as a nurse. She cut ties with me 5 years ago because of the man I'd become. Said she couldn't watch me be that person anymore. Sarah understood suddenly. You saw her when you looked at me. Maybe. Or maybe I saw what I wanted her to be, strong enough to defend herself, capable enough that nobody could push her around. But also. He trailed off, looking up at the stars. Also, I realized that if some guy like me came at her in a bar the way I came at you, I'd want someone to have taught her how to handle it. And then I realized I'm the guy that women need to be protected from, and that's a hard truth to swallow. There was genuine pain in his voice, a raw honesty that Sarah hadn't expected. It's not too late to change that, she said quietly. To be the father she needs, the man she could be proud of. I know. I'm going to try. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to call her. Probably won't answer, but I'll leave a message. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'm trying to be better. He straightened up, the moment of vulnerability passing. Anyway, you should get going. There's a motel about 40 miles south, clean and safe. Tell Martha at the front desk that Crusher sent you. She'll take good care of you. Thank you, Sarah said, and she meant it. Despite everything that had happened, despite the violence and threats, this conversation felt redemptive somehow. A reminder that people were capable of growth, of change, of becoming better versions of themselves. Crusher nodded and stepped back from the car. Safe travels, Sarah Mitchell. Maybe in another life, we could have been friends. Maybe in this one, we still can be. After all, everyone deserves a second chance. She could see the words land, see them mean something to this complicated man who was trying to find his way out of the darkness. He raised a hand in farewell, and Sarah pulled out of the parking lot, watching in her rearview mirror as he mounted his motorcycle and headed in the opposite direction. The road stretched out before her, empty and dark except for her headlights cutting through the night. Sarah drove in silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. She'd stopped at Murphy's bar expecting nothing more than a brief wait while her car was repaired. Instead, she'd been forced to confront parts of herself she'd been trying to leave behind, the training, the reflexes, the part of her that knew exactly how to hurt people efficiently. After 40 minutes of driving, she saw the neon sign from Martha's Motor Lodge glowing in the distance. It was exactly as Crusher had described, a small, clean establishment that had probably been there since the 1970s, maintained with obvious care and pride. Sarah pulled into the parking lot and headed inside. The woman behind the counter was in her 70s, with light hair styled in careful curls and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She looked up from her crossword puzzle and smiled warmly. Welcome to Martha's. You need a room for the night? Yes, please. One night, non-smoking. You got it, dear. Martha, the nameplate confirmed it, pulled out a registration form. That'll be $55, and we've got complimentary coffee and donuts in the morning from 6 to 9. As Sarah filled out the form, Martha studied her with the kind of shrewd assessment that only someone who'd been running a small business for decades could manage. You're the one from Murphy's, aren't you? The girl who had trouble with the iron serpents. Sarah's hand paused for just a moment before continuing to write. News travels fast. Honey, this is a small community. News travels at the speed of light. Jack called his wife, who called her sister, who called me. Martha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. Between you and me, those boys needed someone to take them down a peg. They're not bad people, not really, but they've been getting a little too big for their britches lately. Crusher especially. He seemed genuinely remorseful when we talked afterward. Did he now? Martha's eyebrows rose. Well, that's interesting. Maybe there's hope for him yet. His ex-wife, Brenda, she's a good friend of mine, she'd be happy to hear he's showing some self-awareness. She's been worried about him for years. Martha processed Sarah's payment and handed her a key attached to a large plastic tag. You're in room 12, around the back. It's quiet back there, away from the road noise. You look like you could use a good night's sleep. Thank you, Martha. Crusher said you'd take good care of me. He was right. Crusher sent you? Martha's expression shifted, surprise mixing with something that might have been cautious optimism. Well, I'll be. Maybe the old bear is finally learning something after all. She reached under the counter and produced a small paper bag. Here, take these. Fresh-baked cookies. Made them this afternoon. Sarah accepted the bag with genuine gratitude. You didn't have to do that. Nonsense. Anyone who can put Crusher in his place deserves cookies. Martha's smile was conspiratorial. Besides, I like you. You've got good eyes, kind, but strong. You don't see that combination very often. Sarah carried her small overnight bag to room 12, which was indeed quiet and impeccably clean. The decor was dated, floral bedspreads and wallpaper that probably hadn't been changed since 1985, but everything was spotless and well-maintained. She locked the door, engaged the chain, and allowed herself to finally relax. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone, which had been charging throughout the evening's events. Several missed calls from a blocked number. Her stomach tightened. She knew what those meant, her former employer checking in, making sure she hadn't forgotten that the past never really stayed buried. But there was also a text message from a number she did recognize, her brother Michael, who lived in Houston and knew nothing about her previous life. Hey sis, just checking in. You still planning to visit next week? The kids are excited to see their favorite aunt. Sarah smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. This was why she'd left that life, for moments like this, for family, for the possibility of being normal. She typed out a quick response, definitely still coming. Can't wait to see you all. Had some car trouble today but back on the road. Love you. She ate Martha's cookies. They were exceptional, chocolate chip with just the right balance of crispy edges and soft centers, and took a long, hot shower, washing away the sweat and tension of the evening. When she finally climbed into bed, she expected to lie awake for hours, replaying the fight, analyzing what she could have done differently. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and the sound of birds chirping outside her window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then the previous evening came flooding back, the bar, the bikers, the fight, Crusher's unexpected moment of redemption. She checked her phone, 7:30 a.m. She'd slept for nearly 9 hours, more than she typically managed. Her body ached in various places, not from injuries, but from the exertion of the fight. She might have made it look easy, but controlling 5 attackers without seriously hurting them had required significant effort and precision. After a quick shower and change of clothes, she headed to the small office where Martha had set up the promised coffee and donuts. The old woman was there, refreshing the coffee pot, and she lit up when she saw Sarah. Good morning, dear. Sleep well? Better than I expected, actually. Thank you. Nothing like a clear conscience and clean sheets for a good night's sleep. Martha poured Sarah a cup of coffee without asking, somehow knowing exactly how she'd want it, black, no sugar. I made extra donuts this morning. Chocolate glazed and maple bacon. Help yourself. As Sarah selected a chocolate glazed donut, 3 other guests filtered in, a young couple traveling cross-country and an older gentleman who looked like a traveling salesman from another era. They all nodded politely at Sarah, but she caught them stealing glances, clearly aware of who she was and what had happened the previous evening. The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 25, finally worked up the courage to approach. Excuse me, are you the woman from Murphy's bar? The one who fought the bikers? Sarah suppressed a sigh. So much for anonymity. That was me. The young woman's eyes widened with something like hero worship. That is so badass. I'm sorry, I know it was probably scary and everything, but seriously, you're like an action hero. Could you teach me some moves? I'm always worried about traveling alone with my boyfriend, and it would be nice to know I could defend myself if something happened. Her boyfriend, a lanky man with kind eyes, nodded enthusiastically. She's been watching self-defense videos on YouTube, but it would be amazing if she could learn from someone who actually, has done it in real life. Sarah found herself smiling despite her desire to avoid attention. There was something genuine and earnest about these two young people, a innocence she envied. I can show you a few basic things, she heard herself say. But understand that what happened last night was an extreme situation. The best self-defense is always avoiding dangerous situations in the first place. They spent the next 20 minutes in the parking lot, where Sarah demonstrated basic defensive techniques, how to break a wrist grab, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, vulnerable points to strike if absolutely necessary. The young woman was a quick learner, and her boyfriend proved surprisingly attentive, asking intelligent questions about positioning and leverage. The most important thing, Sarah emphasized as they wrapped up the impromptu lesson, is confidence and awareness. Most attackers look for easy targets. If you walk with purpose, keep your head up, and project confidence, you're much less likely to be targeted in the first place. Thank you so much, the young woman said, giving Sarah an impulsive hug. This trip has been amazing, but it's also been a little scary sometimes. You've made me feel a lot more capable. As the couple headed back to their room to pack up, the older gentleman approached. Up close, Sarah could see he was probably in his late 60s, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. That was kind of you, he said quietly. Teaching them like that. Most people with your skills would have kept driving this morning, avoided any further attention. You sound like you know something about it. I was military, long time ago. Vietnam. I recognize the way you move, the way you assess your environment. You've got the look of someone who's seen real combat, not just self-defense training. He extended his hand. Robert Patterson. Retired Army Ranger. Sarah shook his hand, recognizing the firm grip of someone who'd once been a warrior himself. Sarah Mitchell. And yeah, I've seen some things. Different kind of service, but service nonetheless. Robert nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. The thing about our kind of training is that it never really leaves you. You can retire, you can try to be normal, but when the moment comes, your body knows what to do. It's hardwired. Sometimes I wonder if that's a blessing or a curse. Both, probably. But last night? That was a blessing. Those boys could have seriously hurt you if you'd been anyone else. Instead, you protected yourself, and from what I hear, you did it with remarkable restraint. That takes real skill and real character. I just did what I had to do. That's what all the good ones say. Robert smiled, a knowing expression on his weathered face. You heading to Texas? How did you? Martha talks. She mentioned you were headed south, and your license plates are Virginia, so Texas seems like a logical destination. Big state, easy to disappear if that's what you're after. I'm visiting family, not disappearing. Good. Family's important. Don't lose sight of that. Robert glanced at his watch. I should get moving. But before I go, let me give you some advice, one veteran to another. Whatever you're running from, or running toward, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. The road gets lonely if you're just running. Sarah watched Robert walk back to his car, his words settling over her like a comfortable weight. He was right, of course. She'd spent the last 2 years running, not from anything specific, but from the person she'd been, from the life she'd lived. But maybe it was time to stop running and start building something real. She returned to her room, packed her few belongings, and checked out. Martha insisted on giving her a thermos of fresh coffee for the road and another bag of cookies, waving away Sarah's attempts to pay extra. You come back through here anytime, dear. You'll always have a room at Martha's. The old woman squeezed her hand warmly. And tell Crusher, if you see him again, that Brenda still asks about him. She might not admit it, but she does. I'll pass that along if our paths cross again. Sarah climbed into her Honda, feeling lighter somehow despite the events of the previous evening. The morning sun was bright and warm, promising a beautiful day for driving. She pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway, heading south toward Texas, toward family, toward whatever came next. She'd been driving for about an hour, the radio playing softly in the background, when she noticed the motorcycle in her rearview mirror. It maintained a steady distance, neither closing in nor falling back. After 10 minutes, Sarah's training kicked in. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was following her. She took the next exit, a small town she'd never heard of, and pulled into a gas station. The motorcycle followed, and as it pulled up to the pump beside her, Sarah recognized the rider. It was the barrel-chested giant from the previous night, the one who'd hit his head on the table. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing a sheepish expression. "Before you go all ninja on me again," he said, raising his hands in surrender, "I'm not here to start trouble. Crusher asked me to follow you for a bit, make sure nobody else from the club scene decided to test themselves against you." Sarah studied him, reading his body language for any sign of deception. She found none. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack. Name's Bear, by the way. Seemed like we should at least know each other's names after you knocked me on my ass." He smiled ruefully, touching the back of his head where a significant lump was still visible. "You've got one hell of a right cross, by the way. Sorry about that." "Don't be. I deserved it. We all did." Bear leaned against his motorcycle, his posture relaxed and non-threatening. "Look, Crusher's been different since last night. Called a club meeting this morning, first time in years he's done that. Talked about respect, about being better men. Said we'd been acting like thugs instead of the brotherhood we're supposed to be. Some of the younger guys didn't want to hear it, got all defensive. But the old-timers, the ones who've been around, we heard him. We understood." "That's good to hear." "Yeah, well, you had a bigger impact than you probably realized. But here's the thing, not everyone in the motorcycle community is going to take last night as a lesson in humility. Some people are going to see it as an insult that needs to be answered. So Crusher figured the least we could do was make sure you got safely out of our territory." Sarah felt an unexpected warmth at this gesture. Yesterday, this man had been her enemy. Today, he was something approaching an ally. "I appreciate that, Bear. Truly. We'll tail you for another 100 miles or so, until you're well clear of anyone who might cause problems. After that, you're on your own, but at least we'll know we did right by you." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Also, Crusher wanted me to give you this." Bear reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather patch, the kind motorcycle clubs used to identify themselves and their affiliates. This one was different though, custom-made. It showed a simple flower, or rose, with thorns wrapped around it, and underneath, a single word, respect. Crusher had this made this morning. Called in a favor with a guy who does our patches. He said if you ever need help, if you're ever in trouble and need the club's support, you show this patch. Any iron serpent who sees it will know you're under our protection. Sarah turned the patch over in her hands, feeling the quality of the leather, the careful stitching. It was a remarkable gesture, especially given how their encounter had started. "This means a lot. Tell Crusher thank you. And tell him to call his daughter. Life's too short to let pride keep you from the people you love." Bear nodded solemnly. "I'll tell him. You take care of yourself, Sarah Mitchell. Something tells me the world needs more people like you, strong enough to fight when necessary, but smart enough to show mercy when it counts." He put his helmet back on, started his motorcycle, and pulled out of the gas station. Sarah watched him position himself about a quarter-mile behind her car as she merged back onto the highway. True to his word, he maintained that distance for the next 2 hours, a silent guardian ensuring her safe passage. When she finally crossed into the next state, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw Bear pull over to the shoulder. He raised his hand in a final salute, then turned around and headed back north. Sarah felt a surprising pang of something, not quite sadness, but a recognition that she'd made an unexpected connection with people she never would have anticipated. The rest of the drive passed uneventfully. Sarah stopped for lunch at a small diner, where the waitress was friendly and the food was exactly the kind of comfort meal she needed. She called her brother to let him know she'd be arriving the next day, and she could hear the excitement in his voice, the sound of her niece and nephew shouting in the background about Aunt Sarah's visit. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah found herself reflecting on the past 24 hours. She'd stopped at Murphy's bar expecting nothing more than a routine stop, a forgettable moment in an otherwise ordinary trip. Instead, she'd been forced to confront her past, to use skills she'd hoped to leave behind. But in doing so, she'd also been reminded that those skills, that training, that experience, didn't have to define her. They were tools she possessed, not the sum total of who she was. More importantly, she'd witnessed transformation. Crusher, a man who seemed set in his ways, had shown the courage to change, to become better. If someone like him could evolve, could grow beyond the limitations of who he always been, then surely she could too. Maybe the goal wasn't to completely erase her past, but to integrate it, to take the strength and skills she developed and use them in service of building a better future. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, made it home safe. Called Brenda. We're talking. Thank you. See. Sarah smiled and typed back, glad to hear it. Be the man your daughter needs. You've got this. Another message came through almost immediately, you too. Be the person you need. Safe travels. She set the phone down and focused on the road ahead. Somewhere out there, her brother's family was waiting. Somewhere out there was the possibility of a normal life, barbecues and birthday parties, helping with homework and teaching her niece and nephew how to ride bikes. Simple things. Beautiful things. The road stretched out before her, full of promise and possibility. Sarah Mitchell, former government operative, woman who'd taken down 5 bikers in less than 2 minutes, aunt and sister and friend, pressed down on the accelerator and drove toward her future, finally ready to stop running and start living. The sun dipped below the horizon, and as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to escape their past, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who'd finally made peace with who they were and who they wanted to become. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she'd face them, not as a weapon, not as an operative, but as herself. And that, she realized, was more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.